After millennia being held hostage to survival under papal patriarchy, the question is, what if our divinity identity was never meant to be law, but lived? What if the chaos isn't the end, but an invitation to return? And the Mami Wata, Mami Isis prophetess, priestess system of ancient Kemet, the progenitor of civilizations we know today as Egypt, West Africa, the Levant, Mesopotamia, Italy, Hibernia, etc., every human carries a spark of the divine. This spiritual essence is our highest self, our inner compass, our divine consciousness. It is not something we earn, we are born with it. In a world that often tells us we are broken and need saving, since time immemorial, this lineage remains in us unbroken, whole. However, this lifetime, as mother wound empaths, the challenge is remembering. As such, it is likely this is not the first, but for those of us doing the inner healing work in preparation for reclamation of this lineage in the post chaos world, it is the lifetime, though excruciatingly painful, that resituates us within a divinely aligned destiny. Mu, Atlantis, Mesopotamia, Levant, Hibernia, Polynesia, ancient Africa. In the golden age, there was a divine mother, confederation. This golden age confederation assumed safety. During the height of the Golden Age, there was a widespread cultural trust that major civilizations were aligned under the law of the mother. Because large-scale warfare was rare and most disputes were settled by priestess councils, leaving a community for months or even years for ceremonial exchange was not seen as risky. But it was. And we'll get into that in later sessions. For now, suffice it to say, no one has ever had our back. We've always been left out into the wind to fend for ourselves just because the perception is that we can. If we're all that, if we're that all knowing in the eyes of other people, when it's out in the open that we are empaths, that we do have an ability to see to whatever degree we have, but especially during this time, once recognized as a child and taken through initiations to learn and be trained in your particular gift, it was quite profound and quite astounding. And so people didn't feel like they needed to have our back. And so we'll get more into what happened as a result of that. But for today, we want to look at how that affected us and why those effects are the root cause for feelings of loneliness mother wound empaths have today. Context as pretext. Having this as our pretext helps to cut down on the overwhelm of acknowledging MDT, overwhelm doing the continual inner work of transformation from living in shame, blame, and guilt, overwhelm of managing emotional regulation and material stabilization while letting go of the mother we want in order to accept the one we have. So, having a context in which to operate from cuts down on the overwhelm. Picture a butterfly. When I Googled the percentage of butterflies that survive from the cocoon, the answer I received is um, only 20 to 40% are likely to make it. From that stage to butterfly, the majority don't survive to adulthood due to various factors like predation, disease, and unfavorable environmental conditions, all of which the Confederation of Divine Mothers experienced as the impetus of their downfall. So, why is the mommy Isis priestess familiar? The serpent, the Ouroboros. It's not the
After
butterfly.
millennia being held hostage to survival
In my
under
own
papal
work, as I continue to
patriarchy,
detox
the question
internally
is,
and
what if our
externally the
divinity
outer and
identity was
inner
never meant
chaos
to
of my
be law,
life, I'm
but
being called
lived?
to remember
What
these
if the
things.
chaos isn't the end,
And
but an
I'm
invitation
about
to
to
return?
have a mercury
And the Mami
amalgam
Wata, Mami Isis, prophetess,
removed.
priestess,
And it's
systems
actually
of ancient
multiple, but
Kemet,
I
the
experience it in my
progenitor of
bloodstream as
civilizations we
an
know today
amalgam. But
as
there are
Egypt,
five
West
teeth, and of
Africa, the
course, they have
Levant,
their own numbers and their
Mesopotamia,
own
Italy,
organ
Hibernia, etc.
associations. And so I've been studying this
Every human
symbology,
carries
and
a
it's a whole
spark of
nother
the divine.
session in
This
itself.
spiritual essence is
But
our highest self, our
the
inner compass,
teeth,
our
the
divine
dental
consciousness.
DNA, tells
It is
the
not
most of any
something we
part of the
earn,
human body
we are
about our
born
DNA.
with it.
So,
In a
this very
world that
deep
often
work,
tells us we are
internally and
broken and need
externally,
saving,
with
since
processing
time
and
immemorial,
integrating
this
the
lineage
chaos, is
remains in
something
us,
that not only I
unbroken,
have been called to do,
whole.
but as part of my
However,
karma yoga, am
this
called to
lifetime has
share.
mother wound
And
implants. The challenge
within this
is remembering.
context of the
As
wound
such, it is
and the
likely this
root,
is not the
it is
first, but
imperative
for
we
those of us
return
doing
to it
the
to heal
inner
it. I
healing
have
work
to go
in
back
preparation
to
for
the
reclamation of this
mercury
lineage in the
feeling,
post chaos
have it
world,
removed
it is the
holistically
lifetime,
so that I'm
though
not
excruciatingly
recontaminated
painful,
and
that
replaced with
resituates us
a
within a
substance
divinely
that is
aligned
more in
destiny.
coherence with an organic human body. And so, why priestesses walk alone and how we can end this loneliness is by understanding the context in which we, as old soul empaths, are experiencing the loneliness. And the context we are experiencing it in is as old souls who have been a part of matriarchy and have had to sell out our spiritual foundation in order to survive papal patriarchy. Over lifetimes of doing this, we have compromised our own values, creating additional karma for ourselves, and in so doing, have obstructed the mother daughter sister unity that upheld not only us, but our families, our communities, societies, the world. This is the return that Great Mother is inviting us to. This is the call home that Great Mother is articulating. The pain of isolation is a symptom of the wound. It's not our true state. Loneliness and the cognitive dissonance of divinity, of living in it, this is what we are experiencing as our internal chaos. What we need is to discover how to spot kindred spirits, our sisters, our daughters, our mothers in this life and in other lives who have returned in forms that we may not even recognize. But once we connect to Great Mother's calling and make our divinity identity our daily practice through living and loving detachment, we will recognize them, those who get it without us having to explain everything. Because we desire that compatibility. That's why we're lonely. The desire is so deep to have desired company, people we're compatible with. And so our path is not meant to be solitary. There was a time where we were very, very communal. That is the matriarchal way. And so our dilemma then comes in full view as the misalignment between our ego experience and our soul purpose. On a soul level, we know we are divinely incarnate, but it feels like the ego experience is refuting this truth. It's been a long night, guided by Great Mother, the light of the moon and the water, the spirit within that gives us life. We recognize, reconnect, and reclaim our divinity not as some vague remembrance or overreaching healing dogma, but as the pain, need, and desire for genuine connection within ourselves and with others who see, know, and love us. We deserve the love of our angels, guides, and ancestors who guide us through and to living and loving detachment. But as above, so below. We deserve it in material experience as well. But we either suppress, rationalize, or avoid addressing our unmet maternal needs because that is mama. And if she didn't sufficiently do that, in fact, often did the opposite, and it is taboo to object or even examine this experience, it produces duplicity or cognitive dissonance. Duplicity of feeling unloved and loved produces the cognitive dissonance of believing what we are conditioned to believe. We are loved, existing within an opposing lived experience that proves we're not. We're old souls. We know what love is, but we are all wounded, especially those of us of this old soul clan. For empaths, this constant state of teetering emotions threatens our mental, emotional, and physical well being until we begin to challenge and fully examine it. We don't do that because we want to keep the peace. That's very important to us, not just for other people, but for ourselves. It's hard enough being emotionally dysregulated. We just want to keep the peace. So, as highly sensitive people, there's that, along with the fear of further abandonment and abuse. So, we feel it is taboo, it's wrong, not just for others, but for our own self management without the awareness, without the context, without the pretext that we are learning here through Great Mother's guidance. We feel that it's evil or sin to defend our divinity when it is the polar opposite. Our coping mechanisms are wrong. They are from the papal patriarchy. They tell us to deny our MDT. They tell us our only job is to caretake for others. They tell us that addictions are not even worthy to be mentioned. Addictions are attempts to avoid pain. Loneliness is a pain point. Avoiding it only deepens the pain, just like any other avoidance, just simply deepens it. Because our spirit is ill at ease, our emotions are dysregulated, going from 0 to 10 when unhealed wounds through avoidance, through self flagellation, feeling unloved as being justified, or caring for others to an imbalanced extent is justified, only makes the triggers for those unhealed wounds, which is what triggers are, unhealed wounds, that much more amplified. It amplifies them even more. So there's no avoiding them. Our challenge is to align ourselves. And that's why the mantra, I am a dearly loved divine child of the great Mother, Father God who is never judged, condemned, or left alone, is the foundation of our inner work in grieving or letting go of the paralysis of any kind of analysis and the emotional exhaustion it produces, so that we can stand on that, build on that through our daily experience of Great Mother proving to us that indeed we are, so that we get stronger and stronger and able to confront the truth about how we feel. Because if it is not mostly our divine birthright to be healthy, happy, and whole, we're out of alignment. We're completely out of alignment. And this imbalance keeps us teetering on the edge of divinity instead of living it. Those fears of rejection, neglect, the bite of further abandonment and abuse, once we think we finally reach safe shores, that really intensifies. We really, are afraid of abandonment and abuse. It never ends. It just cycles up even more. These are not just emotions we manufacture. These are our ancestral inherited wounds. They are ancestrally inherited triggers, unhealed wounds. And we will be addressing the top 10 MDT triggers in this 2.0 MDT Academy Trigger Release Series. So now that we're locked in, as you can hear, we're not talking about the difference between being alone and lonely. You can Google that. We're talking about the loneliness trigger for mother wound empaths, where it's rooted in us, and how to release it. This is Mama Drama Trauma Academy, home of the Mama Drama Trauma Healing Oracle deck, and where we learn how to live in loving detachment from mama, the drama, and the trauma. Let's begin with our Healing Oracle deck spread. We're asking Great Mother, we don't know, show us, tell us what we need to know about reclaiming the inner priestess. Tell us what we need to know about reclaiming the inner priestess in the face of loneliness. How do we reclaim this heritage where this root wound abides and therefore where its remedy is? The root of the toxicity in my bloodstream is this mercury amalgam. Pulling it out by its roots is necessary to detox and to therefore heal. The first card tells us the ancestral suppression. What aspect of my priestess nature or our priestess nature was silenced in our maternal line? The second card tells us the empathic echo. How is this suppression showing up in our emotional lives today? And the third card is the spiritual medicine, the remedy. What sacred practice or mindset will help us reclaim our inner priestess? So, the first card that we have from the deck is the Ra card. This is a third eye card. It is a waxing gibbous moon card. So the waxing gibbous is right before the full moon. That's the revision phase of the inner eye. It's a beautiful lavender card. Gifts, talents, and abilities. Gifts, talents, and abilities. So, the ancestral suppression, what aspect of my priestess nature was silenced in my maternal line? So, in our maternal line, what was suppressed were our gifts, talents, and abilities. So, Great Mother is saying, in order to reclaim the inner priestess, we need to first know that what was suppressed in our ancestral line were our gifts, talents, and abilities. The second card is the empathic echo. How is this suppression showing up in our emotional life today? That is the green Aspire Suit Integrity card. I for the I in Aspire is integrity. And this is a balsamic moon card, the download card, the phase before the new moon, before the dark black moon. So this is eternal grace and mercy. So the empathic echo, how this suppression of our gifts, talents, and abilities is showing up in our emotional life today is by the eternal grace and mercy. So even though our gifts, talents, and abilities as prophetess priestesses has been suppressed, they are showing up in our emotional life today as eternal grace and mercy. There is a grace around them within us and in our hearts. This is fourth chakra, fourth card, aspire, I, heart chakra energy. In our hearts, we feel a grace and a mercy that they are still our gifts, that we have the ability to do our work and the returning work of the prophetess priestess in post chaos as we are continuing our inner work now. So the internal eternal grace and mercy of integrity is the empathic echo. And the third card, our spiritual medicine, is the newt card, the root chakra card, new moon phase, unseen, unheard. So the spiritual medicine, what sacred practice or mindset will help us reclaim our inner priestess is recognizing that we are still unseen and unheard. And of course, those of us who do spiritual practice with the Mama Drama Trauma Healing Oracle deck know that we are first unseen and unheard by ourselves. No one can ignore us and not know what our needs are or even who we are unless we don't know. When we know, that's all that matters. It's nice if other people recognize it, and I've shared that with you as an audience here. It's nice to have some um, dialogue with you, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary. So that is the nude card, unseen, unheard. The root chakra new moon card is the spiritual medicine to know within ourselves, regardless of whether or not our inner priestess is seen or heard. The spiritual medicine is that we do. Okay, that's our reading for today and reclaiming the inner priestess. Now, you may carry a double burden, the physical code of sacred sensitivity and the ancestral memory of being punished for it. And so that's where we get into different kinds of experiences and ancestral lineages with mama drama trauma. So the symptoms of an unintegrated legacy often has to do with this feeling of overwhelm by subtle energies. Okay, we were talking about overwhelm of doing the work. We can have overwhelm of subtle energies. Symptoms of unintegrated legacy can be a deep resistance to visibility or that self worth that we just talked about of being seen and heard within ourselves. Unexplained fear or spiritual power or clairvoyant gifts, just always being shocked that we're seeing things. You know, I've worked with people who are always shocked that they feel things or they sense things or when they touch different things that things come up. And no matter how many exercises and how much work, I don't coach anymore. Um, I would do, with the person, they just would still be, you know, we all have our own pace of growth. And so that's why the inner work is so important, because once we get to that secure state, and that's something that we're always working on to sustain in a patriarchal world, we have to do the work to balance that always, is that we don't have as many trust issues because we know what value we have within ourselves, let alone what we bring to a table. And we can see whether or not we're being met equally. And if we're not, we consciously choose whether or not to share from our overflow or to compensate what others may not have. So there's nothing new under the sun. All of this self-regulation, these are things of self-love that we've evolved to and that we're learning about over our lifetimes, that are enhancing our original priestesshood. These are things that we would have never grown and evolved to under the primordial state of the divine golden age of the matriarch. This understanding, the princess treatment that is intuitive to many of us, that we don't feel that we receive, that comes from that age. It was the norm for women, never ruled by patriarchy. The African women were never ruled by patriarchy. This power that we're constantly having to justify in this patriarchal environment, we've just been short circuited. We've just been short circuited. That's all. And that's why context and pretext is so very important. Now, why priestesses walk alone? This dark night of the soul that we're in, facing this shadow, this part of ourselves that we didn't want to see, we couldn't see, we didn't know. This is why Great Mother is making this message so clear to us now with this trigger management. This is something that we're needing to master before we move on to supporting others who will surely be needing this type of mentoring during post chaos. Many of us, many people are doing the work now. But today, as we focus on loneliness, we want to assert I am a living beacon of resonance. My energy naturally calls forth the women, allies, and sacred kin who share my heart, my path, and my purpose. I have the wisdom to recognize them, the courage to trust them, and the joy to walk beside them as we flourish together in the return to natural order. Now, that's the post chaos prep cheat code. The post chaos prep cheat code for loneliness is I am a living beacon of resonance. My energy naturally calls forth the women, allies, and sacred kin who share my heart, my path, and my purpose. I have the wisdom to recognize them, the courage to trust them, and the joy to walk beside them as we flourish together in the return to natural order. The pain is that we aspire to live in loving detachment from shame, blame, and guilt. It's very painful to do because shame, blame, and guilt are the foundational wounds reinforcing a belief in powerlessness. It's ego limitations. And so we have to accept those. That's what living and loving detachment is. It's just accepting what is with love. There are limitations of the ego. Our mother, unaware of who she is as a dearly loved divine child of the great mother, father, God, who's never judged, condemned, or left alone, is limited. by her own self perceptions. And so, who does she not know that she is? Who are we learning that we are as Mommy Isis prophetesses? We were temple based prophetesses and initiates of Isis, the great mother deity of Kemet, whose worship extended from Namibia to the Greco Roman world. The word Mami Isi from Permez, house of birth, refers to the sacred birthing temples of Isis. Often we've heard Dendera, okay, that was one of them. It refers to the sacred birthing temples. And these birthing temples, we've come to be known as the Red Table, and all this comes from this tradition, Permez. They were often adjacent to larger temples like Philae and Dendera. Okay, so the Dendera was the larger temple. And these were spaces where the divine feminine manifested in physical, psychic, and spiritual forms. So it was a matter of course that we lived in that type of environment. We had an empathic sensitivity used to intuit the needs of the community and translate messages from the gods. Of course, we know from the Dogon tradition of Isis coming from Sirius B and Osiris coming from Orion, this first male female archetype that brought into being humanity, and the law of Ma'at to sustain it was what we would communicate back and forth between the people. It was a sacred midwifery. It was both literal, helping with childbirth through these birthing temples, but the metaphysical, the helping to birth kings and the bloodline through the priestesses. The priestesses were the mothers, the mommies, the mother Isis that came through this lineage who named the kings. They agreed upon which of their sons would be the kings based on a very elaborate initiation. We had an oracular power. We were mediums of Isis herself. We spoke on Isis' behalf and embodied her presence during rituals or in dreams, you know? And so the pain comes from several vantage points when we talk about loneliness of the empath today, who is a descendant of all of this. There's the pain of that not being seen. That not being seen card that showed up in the position of spiritual medicine, that has to do with the priestesses being exiled from the temples. We were visibly exiled from the temples as patriarchy took a foothold over the millennia. Just as the serpent sheds its skin, our association with the serpent being the birthing of the spirit from the waters, the dark waters in which many of us are still in the dark night of the soul. Don't lose heart, because we come upon the shore. But just as in the story of evolution, it only came into the human mind in the last 100 years, but has been the reality of the life force, there is a transitory being. That's the mermaid, mermen, the trans community. They are both male and female. That's what the pneumos were, the pneumos from Amma. Amma was the physical form of Isis that came into being as the mother of this particular galaxy. And through her creation of the pneumos, the waters, the eels, that electrical force that came into life, and eventually the mother being the obvious God giving life, and her association with this eel from her prior state of being a mermaid, that interim state of evolution. All of us, first as normal, that heritage, that lineage, we're both male and female. That's where we get the god, goddess, so always having a consort, the male, the female, the gonads, the genitalia, that's sacred, that's sacral, that sacred space. It's not about sex or gender. It's about being seen as a spiritual being. And when you're exiled from the temple and you are not recognized, then you are always given someone in spirit's stead. The angels, guides, ancestors, and the serpent became her guide that could see her and could confirm for her through symbolic motion, presence, the word, that masculine symbology. Not being heard, our prophecies were silenced or usurped verbatim. Many of our favorite scriptures in the Bible came from the Sibylline oracles. The hiss as a primal sound, and how we used sound to move rocks into structures, not being heard. Why today we can't figure out how these ancient structures were made. We sang many of them into being. So, what this does is it puts us in a state of needing to acknowledge this mismatched intimacy that we experience as mother wound empaths, where we're giving this depth and vulnerability of ourselves, but only receiving surface level connection. We need to acknowledge in this not being seen or heard the self silencing that we do, holding back our own words, emotions, or needs because we expect them not to be received. We also have the loneliness pain of not being understood. So our mysteries were distorted, misinterpreted, and the duality of the snake as being something that is feared and loathed, but also something that's respected, the venom as healing or hurtful. This association within the limited scope of the papal patriarchy made us evil. So we weren't understood. We were put into this emotional exile, feeling like an outsider in our own families we created, our own societies that we established, our own cultures that we constructed. And so it becomes a self inquiry, okay? And we have to question whether or not we belong, secretly wondering, do I even fit on this earth? In this age? Am I supposed to be here at all? These kinds of questions, this kind of self inquiry is always circling and cycling without satisfactory um, reason or response to them. We want to recognize that our fear of rejection is this fear of loneliness veiled in this fear of banishment from patriarchal courts. We feared that. It was very dangerous. We died. We were enslaved. Many of the Black Native Americans were the descendants of these Mami Isis priestesses who were enslaved and taken throughout different parts of the world. So, this banishment from these patriarchal courts and this idea that the serpent strikes when necessary instilled fear in them because we were divinely protected. We are divinely protected. And when we were still more connected to that, it would wreak havoc on them, which is why we are even so feared today. That's an ancestral wound that the patriarchy has for those of us who manifest in the form of the descendant of the Mami Isis priestesses. So, this fear of rejected, being surrounded yet disconnected is a form of this rejection, right? Feeling invisible, even in a crowd, family, or community. We have to process this. We have to, once we accept it, it still has to be processed, you know. And we still have to process this kind of time distortion that we have um, with our high sensitivity. Days for us sometimes can blur without meaningful connection. We're still concentrated on the depths of our emotions and on the depth of our experience that makes life feel weightless or unanchored. And for some of us, that feels very heavy. And so that needs to be processed. We have a lot of loneliness around the idea of longing for this belonging. As priestess circles were fractured across continents, the serpent circles itself. And so, this idea of the self consumption, of the serpent eating itself and going around and around and around, there's transformation occurring. And certainly there has been evolution, but it has not been linear. It has been circular, like the symbology of the mother. And so we want to see this longing not as a disconnection from source as it has been these moments when even spiritual practices have felt flat, unreachable, unacceptable, demonized. We want to return to our integrity, telling ourselves the truth so that we stop alienating ourselves from our body, from our mind, from our spirituality. That numbness, that feeling out of touch, or cutting ourselves off from our own embodied presence. We need to tell ourselves the truth that now that we know what we're truly longing to belong to is back in our rightful lineage, our rightful place. And first and foremost, that is within ourselves. Because the loneliness, when it shows up as dimming our light to fit in because we are so afraid to be alone, we're not in our integrity. What we are doing is we are rekindling the dilution of our wisdom. We're doing it for the oppressor. They don't even have to do it anymore. We're dimming our own light. And so in the priestly hierarchies, um, we had the luminous scales not only of our sound, but of our connection to the spiritual world. And that's something that centered us, was the truth of us, and what allowed the transformation of rebirth to happen for us, shining our lights. When we don't do that, that is creating loneliness in and of itself. Because when we don't shine our lights, how can others witness our milestones? We have unwitnessed milestones that go on forever. You know, the victories and the enduring hardships that we've done alone, and the trials and tribulations and the troubles that we've overcome, not being celebrated, uncelebrated, without acknowledgement of any kind. This is what blocks our resurrection into our liberation from mama drama trauma. It has to be celebrated. That's the ritual. That's why we traveled so far. That's why we had a confederation around the world. No, not everyone in our local communities could recognize our milestones because they were mysteries to them. But to other matriarchs around the world, they knew what we were going through and what we needed to celebrate. And that's why we connected. So, that resurrection piece is very important. That is a release piece. That's a letting go. We cannot integrate our experience until we are able to release the experience, and we release it through acknowledgement and celebration. When we don't do that and we keep living, although we may have acknowledged it, what happens is that since it hasn't been acknowledged by a larger community, it's not believed. And so we're branded as heretics, witches, or outsiders because they don't know what the heck's going on. And so this symbol of suffering and silence, this loneliness migrates between the sacredness within and these retreats and these sacred sites that we go to for this silent serpent recoiling that we do within ourselves over and over again, like the Ouroboros, because of a lack of the communal presence that we need to emancipate the experience. So we carry unshared wisdom. That is huge loneliness, knowing truths or having visions, but with no one safe to share them with, keeps us locked in loneliness. So the pain of this unhealed wound, this isolation, is just a symptom of the wound of loneliness, of our desire to return to our true selves. This cognitive dissonance with divinity is just a symptom of the wound of rehashing and cycling shame, blame, and guilt, which is not our natural state. Okay, so how does empath's pain of loneliness align with the mommy Isis priestess lineage? Well, we talked about how it does in quite a few instances. But when we talk about the law or the principles of Ubuntu, the major principles associated with African law, this first and foremost, number one, is interconnectedness. It emphasizes the idea that all things are connected and that one's actions affect the whole. So it's expressed as I am because we are. So this highlights interdependence of individuals and their communities. So for them, loneliness was less about lack of community as it is for us. Since they often traveled in pairs or small circles, um, for them, it was more about existential separation, the ache of being custodians of mysteries. The surrounding societies either feared, rejected, or sought to exploit. For them, loneliness was addressed through their pilgrimages across continents, from Kemet to Hibernia, Asia Minor, the Niger Basin, the Indus Valley, to the Americas, Polynesia. These were acts of seeking resonance. And so they weren't running away in this golden age, but they were following ley lines of energy to meet others who remembered. So um, when they were stationed in hostile or patriarchal territories in later ages, you know, they began to bore the heavy burden of being unrecognized carriers of world order wisdom. And this is what I refer to as older souls who have this root wound of this burden of being unrecognized and just kind of accepting that that's just the way it is. That is a stone of loneliness. And so it was from this form of loneliness, being seen but not known, carrying sacred knowledge that no one around them could fully mirror back, that they just stopped looking for the mirror. And that's one of the symbols of Mami Wata: the comb, self care, and the mirror. Always recognizing that there is a mirror, there is a consort, there is a balance, there is a yin, there is a yang, there is coherence. throughout the fields. And so the need that we have from this pain is to aspire to walk in this dark night of the soul, walk in this shadow, not go under, over, around, or try to get over it, but go through the valley of the shadows of death, fearing no evil, for thou art with me. Where dark waters meet the shore, stabilization is required. So we're again looking at the butterfly versus the serpent. So we have air energy, that's the thoughts, ideas, the communication. Absolutely, we're about that. But we are essentially the serpent energy, the dark waters meeting the shore. And that's reverberated in us as humanity throughout the ages in our material, emotional, and spiritual evolution on this planet. So, when we are not seen or heard, we need to acknowledge the need for renewal. Renewal, regardless of whether or not we're witnessed by others. Our voice carries vibration beyond the word, the sound of our voice. When not being understood, we need to self inquire. Instead of wondering if we fit in, we need to ask ourselves, what am I here to do on earth in this age? And then, why am I holding back? When not balanced, dissonant, we are in the fear of rejection, abandonment, and abuse. We need to process. And boundaries are necessary for us to do that. In this way, boundaries are important in ways that are rarely discussed. We usually think of boundaries as keeping others out. And in this sense of boundaries, with regard to imbalance and dissonance, that's an internal job. That's an inside job. And that is not so much keeping people out, but sustaining the divinity from within and whatever practices that we need to do that, which is our aim here at the Academy, is to work with an augmented context so that we can operate within a divine pretext in our healing work. It's a continuous thing. And so those are the things that our boundary has to address. It has to address protecting what's necessary for us to stay in alignment with our divinity identity. When not being understood, we need to tell ourselves the truth about the eternal return to wholeness, that Ouroboros energy that tells us we are here to constantly evolve, to constantly grow. Yes, it has been a struggle and a violation of who we are to experience the lifetimes that we've experienced. And including this lifetime, it has expressed itself as pain in many instances because we've been identified with shame, blame, and guilt. When we tell ourselves the truth, we begin to evolve in the direction of augmenting our divinity, augmenting our propheting abilities, our prophesying abilities in ways that first and foremost support ourselves. So, this is all about free will activation, the loneliness and denial of that self sovereignty needs to recognize, we need to recognize that we have the power to anchor ourselves in the I am. I am the path. I am the embodiment. Everything else is added unto me. I don't start off needing. And that's what mama drama trauma can do. It can darken the shadow of of divinity so deeply that we believe that we are at a deficit, when in fact we are being embraced more fully by Great Mother. We are being more deeply embraced by her. So being the path is less about this spontaneity that we so often associate with ascension and all of these other things. And it's more about congruence, alignment with our true divine selves. So we want to show up in our own healing process in a way that is not waiting to feel finished. We're not waiting to return to a place that we've never been. It's in us. It's part of who we are. And so instead of the butterfly of this ascension and this flying away as the symbolism for us, it is the serpent, it is the snake, not in the papal, patriarchal, demonic way that has been used to demote us from our sacerdotal seat, but as the duality of this internal external chaos and the order that we have the divinity to construct through our voice, through the way we speak to ourselves, through the way that we acknowledge and we know light from darkness. We recognize the tempter of the dark energy of the serpent, and we face it with the light. The dark energy is the tempter that tempts us until we can no longer be tempted. And the light is what tells us where we are still weak, where we still need to protect our divinity, and where we have yet more inner work to do. That's the Kundalini serpent that moves through the chakras that we work with in the deck. Because the demon is venomous, but sometimes the venom is the medicine, it is the antidote. So opposites don't mean enemies necessarily. They are counterparts. They are consorts to the god, goddess, the yin yang. And they dissolve and rebuild into higher self versions of and expressions of ourselves. And so when we're dimming the light, what we need is to resurrect radiance in the shadow. And we can do that when we're not afraid of it, when we're not trying to walk around it and walk over it, and we're walking through it, we see it. We always have enough light to see it. And so, this transformative life, death, rebirth, that central component of our interconnectedness throughout all life and humanity is something that we can always rely on as the light. So we have no need to dim our light. We know, we recognize that we're walking in the radiance of our shadow. When we're not being believed, we need to liberate, self emancipate, activate our inner power, that self sovereignty that cultivates an unseen authority to live our birthright. It is unseen. It's immaterial. It is within us that we simply need to activate. Now, this is the occult symbolism of the serpent, that secret guardian, that initiator, the balance and mastery of these hidden forces winding through perilous paths of enlightenment, the mastery we've earned, new understandings without being consumed by them, yet willing to release what no longer serves it, but serves us, but was necessary to attain the wisdom. Okay, we're able to distinguish more clearly. And this divine energy connection that the prophetess had was more about an inner fire, this force coiled up in this serpentine energy that was a bridge between the human and divine. Remember, that dark shore meeting the earth, that balance that we always have to make between the emotion and the groundedness of everyday physical challenges of maintaining survival in life. Now, this takes humility, it takes courage, it takes knowing that this phallic imagery is what is holding the universe up, but we hold it together. Everything is connected. And so when we see beyond the illusion and we get into the esoteric applications, it's about understanding this energy and using our emotions to navigate through them, as opposed to our emotions dictating to us what is useful, what is necessary through this papal patriarchal conditioning that cycles through us and through countless existences that we've had. And so we want to now recognize this as alchemy. This is something that we are integrating now as a great work of inner transformation with latent spiritual pharaonic symbolism as the maternal, the mason, the mother of the sons of buildings, of building civilizations, of awakening third eyes through civilization mystery schools, and this hidden knowledge within us, that fear rooted from the experiences of violations of that, we can recognize through this sacred experience and even through a chronology that informs us of the density of this consciousness, this morality, and our divine connection. So when we talk about the Middle Ages and we talk about the zodiac ages and the Yuga dates and all of this, and how the symbolism of these ages, the golden age being pre Leo, we're talking about the zodiac, before 10,500 BC. Satya Yoga, 36,000 to 10,000 BC. We're talking about divine matriarchy. That's the golden age. The golden age is divine matriarchy, peace, oneness, no war or labor, the age of the primordial mother. Universally, that's the golden age. It's pre Leo. The Silver Age is the Leo Cancer Treta Yoga, 10,000 to 4,000 BC. The Lunar Priestess Orders. Early dualism is coming into fore. Sacred water serpent cults like Mami Wata emerge in the 10,000 to 4,000 BCE. The bronze is the Gemini, Taurus, Aries age. And so it expanded those zodiac periods, and it's called the Dvapara Yoga, 4,000 to 1200 BCE. We're talking about the establishment of the Kemet dynasties, the rise of empires, metallurgy, patriarchy, warrior gods, early colonization. The Iron Age is Pisces to Aquarius is the Kali Yuga, 1200 BC to now. So this is the disconnection, the materialism, the digital chaos, the prophecy of feminine return is now. And so this is what we're hearing about now. And this is the age of chaos. Okay. At this now phase of the Kali Yuga, the Iron Age. This age of return that's coming at the beginning of Aquarius is the Satya Yoga. And that's really, 2025 more precisely in some reckonings of the yugas. It's a reawakening of the Sibyls, okay, who are the descendants of the mommy priestesses. It's a restoration of balance, techno spiritual crossroads is where we're at. So, this is why this is so important for us to understand this convergence of time systems as they relate to our internal systems of coherence. The zodiacal age based on the 26,000 year precession of the equinoxes. And then you have the Yuga system rooted in Hindu cosmology. Then the Metal Ages, as spoken by the Sibyls, who tracked ages through the different metals of heaviness, each metal speaking to a psycho spiritual density of humanity and time. And so when we see how all of this is converging and why this matters now, we know that we are at the cups of an epochal age. The Iron Age has delivered an age of artificial intelligence, climate breakdown, and moral confusion. And so, yet everywhere there's signs of a spiritual return flickering. It's just flickering everywhere. And so we're looking, of course, at the material symbolism of spirituality: water, the serpent, ancestral memory resurfacing in art and in dreams, women reclaiming priestess, prophet, and healer roles, and the sacred time reemerging through divination, astrology, and intuition, technology being reimagined as mirror, not master. So there are clear distinctions that we have to make and that we have to be aware of in this transition, as we have been loath not to consider in other times. This isn't all this is all about an internal warfare this time. And if the mommy Isis priestesses and then the Sibyls whispered through fire and air, maybe today they whisper through our screens, our podcast, our wombs, our waking dreams. So, the trigger release that's needed is to discover through this lineage how to spot kindred spirits who get it without us having to explain everything. The more we are in our own integrity, and the more we are able to share ourselves enough to celebrate ourselves and others, the freer we are to connect with those who get it. And the clearer our sight is internally and externally, it is to recognize them. Now, I want to close out here with desire. And I think my voice is a little failing because I'm getting rid of this mercury, and it's like a what do they call it? Something is interrupting the field. But we desire, our aspiration is to live our divine birthright, to be happy, healthy, and whole. So the pain is the loneliness. The need is to release the triggers. And the desire by doing that is to live our birthright. And so in the golden age, Divine Mother Confederation as the model, and combining the African Mommy Isis priestess realms, Atlantis and Mu, the trade and ritual exchange were deeply intertwined with the purpose of maintaining cosmic balance, alliance bonds, and planetary harmony rather than just economic gain. And that's what we want. That's what we really desire. We want to maintain coherence, internal balance, balance with ourselves, balance with those among us that we're interconnected with: human, animal, earth, alliance bonds, planetary harmony. That's what we want. And so, what were they trading? We know that we have all of this stuff that we're trading as consumers. And we've touched on the internal space, what we're trading and what we're blocking and what we want to be more aware of to open up energy blockages. But their trade wasn't purely material either. It was three layered. They had material goods that they traded intellectual and spiritual knowledge, um, They traded sacred objects and symbols. You know, they, from oils to perfumes, of course, myrrh, blue lotus, they established trade routes based on this. They did all of that. The trade routes that are still used today. They established gold and electrum for ritual implements, fine woven clothes, and the weaving symbolism goes back to the Dogon, the herbal medicines from the Nile and West African forests, crystal technology. So these glass skulls all over the planet, they were used in ritual ceremonies for frequency tuning. And then yet something else. We don't know where they came from. That's where they came from. Preserved foods, large monolithic stones, you know, stone templates for sacred constructions, cornerstones that were brought from different parts of the planet, from asteroids and things that landed. You know, just badass. Okay. And so those are the kind of things we traded. Ceremonial rituals, we shared those. Planetary scale rites, where delegations from each civilization would meet at a predetermined scale, sacred site, and there would be celestial alignment ceremonies. Oceanic marriage rites, marriages on oceans and things to represent the connection above ley lines, and this whole water spirit union. Yes, arranged marriages as well to consolidate the consorts and bind the civilizations in kinship. That's why you have people across continents who have similar features. And we talk about the descendants of Genghis Khan, and all of this is actually from the matrilineal um, side of what was going on as well. And so when we merge these bloodlines believed to carry spiritual or genetic keys important for future prophecy and fulfillment, we are ensuring that the sacred leadership stayed connected across the oceanic network. So we always knew who and what we were dealing with. Not some crazy coming up every, couple of years. We knew what people this person came from, and what values they upheld, and what initiation rites and voyages that they had taken, and the elemental renewal festivals that they had attended, and things like that, to absorb and be reabsorbed into the community. And so these rituals and these trades existed in order to support and strengthen the Confederation. That is what we desire. We desire to be able to return to maternity as more than just a biological link, but as a transformative essence of us as women, sisters, daughters, mothers. The mythos of the feminine goddess is the origin of moral consciousness and the spiritual genesis and ancestral royalty of Isis. And we all come from that. All of our God goddess origin stories come from that. I mean, for goodness sakes, Christmas is Isis holding horse, So we observe in the learning, the recognition, the connection, the experiencing, the interconnection as we develop trust, the reclamation, the living it as we experience more and more divinity. We, in this process, observe where we are resisting, what part of this is relaxing, and what spiritual transformation is persisting each time we take a step in it. Because it's all about sovereign activation. This is a personal transformation. This is your own serpent familiar, your own Kundalini rising. So This age that we are returning to is remembered in all of us in some form, whether it's a dream, symbology, sacred texts passed through priestess lines that have also come through males that have reincarnated as males and have authored books that we read, and these ancient sacred texts, the Bible from the Sibyls, et cetera, they come to us this age, they come to us in the body memory of women. We've talked about those aunties and those babysitters and those mentors, those teachers that just loved us up, those Sunday school teachers, neighbors, the menstrual mysteries, playing sports in high school and synchronizing menstrually and connecting through that. We've experienced the birth power, sharing birth with sisters, with cousins, and that intuitive connection. This has survived in our rituals, our water libations, moon offerings, trance dances, and not knowing that the dance is just an invitation for spirit to commune. But we have remnants of our rituals that we haven't fully integrated and understood this lifetime, but we're beginning to. That's what the post chaos period is all about. And so each of us is bringing a piece, each of us is bringing something to the potluck of this great feast, from the trauma of what has been felt as lost, but is now being known in our spirit as the echoes of the great fall and the murder of the goddess, great mother, just to be reborn again. So we're not approaching a new age, we're remembering an original one. This return and this prophecy is the awakening of an ancestral memory, womb memory. It's signaling that the primordial mother is not lost. We are therefore not lonely, but we don't have to wait for any idealized perfection for us to fully embrace the awakening and to exit this iron age, this patriarchal phase, and transition to the next cycle, the Aquarian or Satya, whatever you want to call it. I'm calling it post chaos. That's my lens. I see it through. We're being called to reinstate the sacred goddess in us, not this foreign concept, but as our actual biological mothers within us that we have not known, that we have not revered, that we are now reclaiming. So our desire for compatibility is simply one thought, one desire from sovereign activation. Our path is not meant to be solitary because it is not. So let's anchor our collective wisdom, our healed knowing in the trigger release that we need in this moment from loneliness to wholeness. So I hope that's been very helpful, and that that as the time grows heavier and heavier, mommy is returning more and more. And the cognitive dissonance that we may be experiencing between the patriarchal world that we have adopted and adapted to in relationship to the matrilineal order that is within us is creating a psychological stress in which we're feeling engaged in the behaviors and the conflicts of the existing paradigm. but we are beginning to respond to the internal inconsistencies it has with our own aligned divinity. And so the choice point here is whether we're going to keep avoiding that internal knowing and continue experiencing dissonance, i.e., intensified stress, or are we going to accept the inner knowing, build on that, and have cognitive regulation? This has been Mama Drama Trauma Academy, guiding you from the age of chaos into the golden age where you return to yourself, to your lineage, and to the leadership you were born to embody. I am your host, reminding you, you are the return.